This is the Agoro Carbon Farming Podcast. Agoro Carbon Alliance is taking action on a global scale to reverse the effects of climate change by decarbonizing farming and restoring carbon to the world's soil. On this podcast, we're going to explore carbon farming from the soil to the atmosphere and how it affects everyone in between. To learn more, visit us at agorocarbonalliance.com. Thanks for joining another edition of the Carbon Farming Podcast with Agoro. My name's Scott Warr, and today we're going to talk about nitrogen, specifically how nitrogen use efficiency can increase our yield, hopefully reduce our emissions, and a lower input cost for growers, and in turn will help them adopt carbon cropping efficiencies. And today from Agoro, we have Seth Urbanowitz, who is a carbon science agronomist. And we also have Markus Braaten, who's the market development manager of digital agronomy with Yara. Now, in all disclosure, Agoro Carbon Alliance is a separate company from Yara, but it is backed by Yara. And that's why we have this nice relationship, this symbiotic relationship with Agoro Carbon Alliance and Yara. But we're going to talk about nitrogen use efficiency and how it all plays into this carbon farming narrative. I'm going to start first, Seth, with you. Let's talk carbon removal versus carbon emission reduction. Can you talk about both of those terms and how they're similar yet different?
Sure. A carbon registry usually has either carbon removal, which is sequestration, or storage of carbon in the ground, and that's usually accomplished by implementing some type of reduced tillage or cover cropping in farming, or in ranching. It could be implementing some type of improved grazing, seeding or interseeding, and some nitrogen applications. And carbon emission avoidance or reduction is avoiding those emissions that would have been emitted by implementing improved management practices. And nitrogen falls into the latter category, which is carbon emission avoidance.
Okay. Where does the nitrogen fit in? Is it a carbon removal category, or is it the carbon emission reduction category?
Nitrogen is a carbon emission avoidance or reduction.
Okay. Markus, let's talk about nitrogen's role in the carbon market. Tell us a little bit about what are some of the statements or some of the myths or maybe some of the truths about nitrogen and how it plays into this carbon marketplace.
Yeah, that's a good question, Scott. I guess I would probably start from a very high level at first and say, fundamentally what we do in agriculture is utilize photosynthesis, right? To extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, convert that into a stored energy source using plants, right? Really as the factory. And in order to do that most efficiently, we need to make sure that the other essential nutrients required by that plant to perform photosynthesis are available. And nitrogen is one of those key nutrients. We've long recognized the importance of nitrogen and the impact that it has on crop productivity, and is probably maybe not the first nutrient that we started supplying in a cropping system, but one of the first nutrients that we started supplying in our cropping systems. Of course, we also have to recognize that nitrogen, the production of nitrogen has a distinct carbon footprint, and also the way in which we manage that nutrient on farm might also have an impact on greenhouse emissions, especially if we're applying it in such a way that we're losing some of that, specifically through denitrification and the production of nitrous oxide. So it is definitely a nutrient that figures into this broader conversation around carbon neutrality.
Markus, just as a side note, let's go down a little side trail here because you brought it up. Tell us about the carbon footprint of the manufacturing of nitrogen. Is there you said that there is a carbon emission as we manufacture nitrogen. Are there differences in where and how this nitrogen is manufactured, depending on the type of nitrogen and the plants?
Well, there absolutely is a difference. To some degree, it becomes a little bit difficult to track and quantify. But the one thing that we can say, as Yara, we are investing significantly in reducing our own carbon footprint through innovations at the plants and the production processes that we go through. And I can't speak for every single product within our portfolio, but like if we look specifically at calcium nitrate, the calcium nitrate that we're producing has a carbon footprint that's probably 50% of calcium nitrate that's produced in other parts of the world. So just by choosing the right source, right, in this particular situation, it's a Yara produced calcium nitrate, you're reducing your carbon footprint on farm. So, that's pretty significant. And I would suggest that product sourcing, right, that right source, that right R source is going to become increasingly important as we move forward and explore this concept of carbon neutrality in the future.
So there is absolutely a different carbon footprint with the manufacturing, or where and how the nitrogen is manufactured. But let's get to where the rubber meets the road. Seth, talk to us about Agoro Carbon Alliance's offering when it comes to nitrogen use. There's many different levels or many different processes you can work with a farmer or a grower, whether that's cover cropping, tillage. How does nitrogen fit into Agoro Carbon Alliance's formula?
Sure. So our nitrogen offering can fall into two buckets, and that those buckets are based on either if it's a farming system or a ranching system. So a farming system, our nitrogen offering is some sort of reduction in the total fertilizer used, and that could be attained through implementation of a 4R or implementation of some crop modeling software like AdaptN. Mm-hmm. In a ranching system, we're looking at small additions of nitrogen where it historically was not applied. So, usually 5 to 20 units on rangeland or pasture land that has historically received zero amounts of nitrogen. And this is to increase the above ground and below ground biomass. And that benefits both the grazing animal as well as the sequestration potential of that site.
So the farming side or the ranching side of it makes complete sense to me. That if you can improve the biomass above and below ground, that plant or those plants are going to sequester more carbon, and that's good for the environment. Let's understand a little bit more about the farming side. If you're paying for reduction of nitrogen, it looks like there may be a double-edged sword there. If you reduce nitrogen, are you also reducing overall yield and quality, or is there a balance?
Sure. So I'd like to frame that as improving nitrogen use efficiency and what that might mean to a grower. And so that's optimizing the agronomic value by increasing crop production per unit of nitrogen applied. So greater yield per unit of N. And that also has the benefit of, while you're increasing yield, you're also reducing the gaseous losses and the leaching losses. And that can be usually attained through the implementation of a 4R.
Markus, for those people that aren't familiar what the 4 R's of nutrient stewardship is, can you explain that?
So the 4 R's of nutrient management or nutrient stewardship has really been kind of a hallmark of nutrient management, at least for my entire career. So, 20 years. And I think it was probably around before that. But it really seeks to understand what is the right source of the nutrient. What is the right time to apply that nutrient? What is the right place in which to apply that nutrient? And what is the right rate at which to apply that nutrient? And so when we start to think of it in a very holistic way, we're able to make these decisions on a very site-specific, a very farm-specific basis, and really drives us towards what Seth was articulating around, increased nutrient use efficiency, or in this particular case, nitrogen use efficiency.
Let's talk about some of your background, Markus. You spent a lot of time in the grain crop area of the United States and Canada. Have the growers that are farming those lands and those crops, are they over applying nitrogen, or have they over applied nitrogen? And how can the 4 R's of nutrient stewardship play into this?
Yeah, so another great question. I might almost characterize it as a bit of a loaded question, right? The notion of over application is something that is a little bit concerning. That said, so the geography in which I kind of live and work is the northern plains and prairie provinces of North America. We are, in large part, a rain-fed cropping system. A lot of our nitrogen goes down at time of planting, and it's difficult to understand in a real, kind of resolute way what that rate should be, because our yield potential is a function of moisture, which is variable, right? So oftentimes we're applying rates that kind of make sense for the geography, in the yield environment in a general way in which we function in. But, if one year I've got a drought, the amount of nitrogen that I applied, we could definitely characterize that as an over application because we didn't grow the bushels. Now, we're also blessed, if I can use that characterization, we're blessed from the standpoint we don't get a lot of moisture, so we don't lose the nitrogen due to leaching or anything like that. So that nitrogen very well could still be in the soil. The bottom line, though, is that we know that nitrogen influences crop productivity. And oftentimes the risk for a grower associated with under-fertilization is greater than the risk or the cost of over-fertilization. So there will be times where, there's likely an over-application, but it's not because of, maliciousness or ignorance or anything like that. It's a recognition of the fact that, we live in a very dynamic geography from a yield perspective, and it's difficult for us to know with absolute certainty what that yield is going to be. And we cannot risk, not having adequate nitrogen to grow that crop. Now, that said, there's a lot of steps that we take to mitigate that risk of over-fertilization or, in some situations, risk of loss. So we are seeing a lot more incorporation of split application. We're seeing a lot more use of tools to mitigate loss via denitrification or volatilization, to mitigate that nitrate loss via leaching when it's appropriate. It's probably worth mentioning that nitrogen is the nutrient that's looking for a way to escape.
Oh, good point.
And everyone is best served if we keep that nitrogen in a form that is available for as long as possible to drive crop productivity. And that's really, I think, the goal of the 4 R's. It's the goal of, agronomy deployed in a deep way in a specific geography. And I think we have made significant strides, to that end. I look at just, in the history of my own career, when I started as an agriculture consultant, typical yields. Now, most of my, focus has been in irrigated ground, but, a lot of the average yields for cereals were in the 80 bushel range. That's what we were targeting. Today, we're targeting 110, 120. And dry land, we might not see the same increase in terms of raw bushels, but we're seeing a relative increase even in dry land. And that comes through a changing of our cropping systems, in some situations, moving towards a permanent crop and more robust rotations, and different, strategies for nutrient placement, the movement away from dry broadcast and the movement towards banding near the seed or mid-row banding to mitigate loss and increase nitrogen use efficiency. So a long answer to your question, but if I was to kind of characterize my own experience and how it crosses over, nitrogen use efficiency and the trends that we see around the nitrogen decision, I think that encapsulates it.
And I think Markus brings up a really great point in the complexity of applying nitrogen. So it seems like a basic endeavor, but it's one of the most complex issues that face farmers. You have very dynamic business decisions that need to be made. And also, the nitrogen cycle is one of the most complex things that a farmer is going to have to manage. There are a lot of factors that influence a lot of different losses, factors like pH, texture, moisture, environmental factors like timing and the amount of precipitation, as Mark has mentioned. And then you have these management factors that they can employ, but may or may not cost money. So in total, you have a very complex decision that's based on both kind of social and environmental issues.
I've always said that farmers and ranchers are probably the best jugglers out there. They have so many things to worry about and so many things that are out of their control. Marcus mentioned the weather. If we could control the weather, then you could be more precise with that nitrogen application. And in truth, if we were to take and put this in a lab, the ideal application of nitrogen would be to the plant need. When does the plant need it? And only applying just the right amount of what the plant needs at that specific time, right? But that's not what happens in the real world. And in fact, Marcus and I talk about this all the time. Within the same field, there is spatial variability. It could have the same weather pattern. It could be the same plant, but because of the soil properties, you can do some variable rate nitrogen applications to attach that. Seth, you mentioned adapt in. Do you mind? And Marcus, you can jump in here. Can you explain what adapt in is?
So I think Yara's tool adapt-n is probably best described by Marcus, but I think it comes from the greater concept of adaptive nitrogen management, where you're adapting your rate based on not only the season, but data analyzed and collected from a variety of tools. So that could be soil testing, tissue testing, crop process-based models like adapt-n, and then reevaluating those decisions at the end of the season to try to make the best rate recommendation in the next year.
Anything, Marcus, to add?
Yeah, I don't know if I would add too much. The only thing I would say is that adapt-n is actually a number of models. And as Seth already alluded to, there's a number of factors that influence what that right rate is, right place is, what right time. And adapt-n seeks to kind of pull all that together. So pull together what we know about the soil, what we know about the weather, what we know about nitrogen demand, what we know about the loss mechanisms that might be realized on a particular field, and then deliver a recommendation that is adaptive, right, to this particular year, to this particular session, this particular season. So we have the opportunity with adapt-n to really mitigate a lot of nitrogen loss, to actually drive productivity. So in situations where we recognize that yield potential is maybe higher than what we've maybe fertilized for, we can go in and top it up if we need to. And conversely, if we recognize that maybe we don't have the potential there, or conditions have not been favorable for mineralization or what have you, that we can adjust our fertility programs as well. So it's really about trying to consolidate and condense a lot of agronomic nuance and environmental nuance into some decisions that we make in season. And those decisions actually can be deployed spatially, so we can begin to apply the right rate in the right place within a field based on these more complex models that are part of adapt-n.
Marcus, can you use adapt-n to retroactively evaluate your rate recommendations?
Yeah, and that's a great point, Seth, and probably one of the most valuable aspects of adapt-n is the ability to more or less look back in time and see how your program performs. And so you can begin to see, hey, over the last 3 years, let's say, these are the loss mechanisms that I'm most likely to encounter. This is what I actually lost, and this is what it cost me. Or this was the yield that was left on the table because I didn't apply the nitrogen that I maybe needed to in these parts of the field. So it's actually a twofold tool. One helps us to understand the current state of our nitrogen program from a nitrogen use efficiency perspective. And the other part of it is actually a tool that allows us to drive our nutrient use efficiency in a positive direction, right? And of course, the AdaptN tool is a tool that is utilized by our channel partners, again, to help inform those on-farm decisions around nitrogen management.
As we go back to the metaphor of juggling, it is so much easier to juggle 10 different bowling pins with a couple different people or 3 different people. Seth, talk to us a little bit about your background and how you got involved with Agoro Carbon Alliance and what you do in your role as a member of the Agoro Carbon Alliance team.
Sure. So I grew up in a small town in Illinois along the Wisconsin border. I currently reside in Grand Junction, Colorado. And as you mentioned, I work for the Agoro Carbon Alliance on their science team, where I strengthen the company's research objectives as it relates to regenerative farming and carbon. I have 10 years of experience in the agriculture industry, the university system, and as an independent consultant. I really see my role as an agronomist as applying the technical expertise to solve real-world problems. I really enjoy connecting growers to larger networks and helping them assess strategies and tools through on-farm application and research.
So as someone is a farmer or a rancher is signing up for the Agoro Carbon Alliance or just learning more about it, and they're finding that this may be an avenue that can help them become more regenerative and even maybe add some income to their farm per acre net profits. What does the Agoro Carbon Alliance team do? Look, specifically, let's talk about nitrogen. Would you go in and help these farmers and ranchers with their nitrogen plans?
Absolutely. We have a pretty vast network of agronomists across the country that would sit down with growers and look at ways they could reduce nitrogen or improve efficiency.
Excellent. And how do they get in touch with that team?
They can visit agorocarbon.com and our knowledge hub at agorocarbon.com and look up various articles on nitrogen management and more.
And there's a place there that they can get networked with a local sales agronomist that can help them decide what's right for their system, what's right for their right geography and their right cropping.
Absolutely, Scott.
Seth, as Agoro Carbon Alliance is supported by Yara, and you're developing tools and someone's thinking about signing up, do they have to use Yara products to qualify for this program?
No, we are 100% focused on the voluntary carbon market. So buying and selling carbon, and we make no recommendations for fertilizer or any other products.
And in fact, you're just an advisor. You're saying, here are some options for you. And this is your ranch. This is your operation. It's your business. You can decide what you want to do, but you're in there to give them the options that are available to them. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We're agronomic advisors and solely interested in carbon sequestration.
Markus, what is probably one of the biggest misperceptions about nitrogen?
Well, Scott, I think I would answer that question this way. I think the biggest misconception around nitrogen is that we have a one rate fits all kind of approach, right? If anything, I think we can learn from experience and a lot of modeling is that nitrogen need is very dynamic, and it's influenced by a number of things. So if there is one thing I could advocate for across a very, very wide grower base, it's for a very thoughtful look at the nitrogen program that they're deploying on farm. and contextualize that in their yield environment. And maybe it's a kind of a little bit of a gut check around, is my nitrogen rate, is it too low? Is it too high? Is my yield potential so variable that I really need to move towards some type of a program that allows me to adapt to this year's unique set of environmental situations, and sometimes even economic situations that tend to come up, whether it's the value of the commodity or the cost of the nitrogen. We need to be more responsive than what we have been historically. And I say that because, a lot of times in visiting with growers, we tend to get very protective of our program, right? To the point that we're scared to change it, right? To tweak it in any way, shape, or form. And I think the path forward for us, and if we're truly looking at a desire to increase nitrogen use efficiency, we have to reevaluate the way we're doing nitrogen, the way we're doing all our nutrients. And I think that's one of the exciting things that is being brought to the table by technology. And to be perfectly candid, I think it's an exciting thing that's being brought to the technology because of conversations around greenhouse gas emissions and opportunities around carbon credits and mitigation of emissions. We haven't had those conversations in the past, and so I think it's an exciting time.
It is. Seth, any parting words or wisdom that you'd like to lay on us?
I would like to add that the benefits to yield and less environmental degradation from mineral fertilizers shouldn't preclude us from striving to do better. I think, for our management is a very flexible framework that can be kind of massaged to fit a individual grower's farm or ranch, and, look into ways to do better and look into 4R management.
Markus Braaten, thank you very much for coming on and letting us learn a little bit from your knowledge about nutrient use efficiency, the 4 R's of nutrient management, and how nitrogen, if we use it right, we can actually provide the plant with exactly what it needs when it needs it, and hopefully reduce the amount of nitrogen. That does a couple things. It's good for the environment, and it's also good for your pocketbook. Seth Urbanowitz, thank you for joining us and helping us learn a little bit more about Agoro Carbon Alliance and what kind of advice and programs Agoro Carbon has. If you have questions, if you want to get more answers, if you want to just talk to somebody, agorocarbon.com is the place you should go. They have a knowledge hub there, which has a lot of answers to questions, and you can also connect with a sales agronomist that can meet with you one-on-one and help develop a program and see if it's right for you, whether you're a farmer or a rancher. You've been listening to the Agoro Carbon Farming Podcast, where we bring you knowledge on how to sustainably and profitably transform farming through carbon cropping. To learn more about how you can become a partner, visit us at agorocarbonalliance.com or follow us on our many social media channels: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn.